Welcome everyone to today's patient group focus webinar on patient input and drug reimbursement reviews. What should the future look like? Following up on consultations and recent work here at Canada's Drug Agency to introduce other improvements to drug reimbursement reviews, we're now turning our attention to evolving patient and clinician group input. This webinar kicks off our engagement with patients and patient groups to inform how we evolve. We're excited to continue this conversation today with you all on what the future should look like for patient group input. My name's Sam Sutherland. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an engagement officer here at Canada's Drug Agency. I'll be hosting this webinar today. Bienvenue à tous à notre consultation préalable auprès des organisations de patients visée sur l'évolution de la contribution des groupes de patients aux examens en vue du remboursement d'un médicament de l'Agence des médicaments. Je m'appelle Sam Sutherland, mes pronoms sont il, lui, et je suis un agent d'engagement. Le webinaire aujourd'hui sera en anglais seulement, mais je vous souhaite un gros bonjour à nos participants francophones. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa, located on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have been the keepers and stewards of this land for thousands of years over many generations. I'd like to encourage you all to think about where you live, work, and play. Take a moment to acknowledge the peoples who traditionally occupied, who sustained, and who continue to care for the land that you call home. As we give it a moment for folks to arrive, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So today's presentation is being recorded, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. On Monday, May 12th, so this coming Monday, we'll send a link to the recording to everyone who registered for the webinar. This event is for patient organization representatives and individual patients or caregivers. The information that we're going to present today will be further described in a consultation document that will be posted on the website, again on Monday, May 12th, for feedback from patient groups and patients or caregivers. We will also explain the different ways that you can engage with us on this topic at the end of the webinar today. We should have time for several questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time by clicking the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit them now, and we'll get to them as we move along through the webinar. We'll also be using Zoom polls and the chat today at a few points to engage with the audience and just to get a better sense of the initial views that you might have, which will help inform and guide us in our upcoming consultations. I'd invite you to add comments in the chat when polls are launched if you have any additional comments or responses. We'll be reviewing each and every comment following the webinar. Again, questions, please enter them into the Q&A. So as I mentioned, I'm Sam. I'll be your host for the session. I'm joined today by Michelle Gibbens, our Director of Engagement, who's going to be speaking about patient group input and drug reimbursement reviews, as well as Deirdre DeJean, our lead of HTA and deliberation, who will speak about patient group input in the context of reimbursement review deliberations. We'll also have a very special guest joining us to provide a few opening remarks now, Heather Logan, our Vice President of Strategic Relationships and Initiatives. Heather, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Bonjour et tous et bienvenue. Mon nom est Heather Logan. Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Logan. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the very distinct pleasure of having engagement with our external partners as part of my portfolio here at Canada's Drug Agency. Today is an extension of our commitment as an organization and as leaders within the organization to include the lived and living experience in everything that we do. It's a journey, not a destination. I know that's a bit of a slogan, but it is true. And while we're extremely proud of the work we're doing, we know there's more work to do. I applaud and thank the many patient partners who have encouraged and pushed us, sometimes gently and sometimes a bit more forcefully, to do better, and we thank you for that. Today is a signal to do just that. The work of Canada's Drug Agency affects millions of Canadians. The outcomes are real, and they impact individuals, their families, their caregivers, and their care providers. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Michelle is going to explain how you can give feedback, or Sam will at the end of this webinar, and I truly hope that you do. We will read everything that comes in, and it will get careful consideration. Thank you very much for joining again today and for your active input. And Sam, I'll pass it over to you to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Heather. So I'd like to kick this off with a little icebreaker question just to get the audience involved. Really curious to know what province or territory you're joining us from today. we'd welcome you to drop your province in the chat or territory again. As a pan-Canadian health organization, Canada's Drug Agency strives to hear from all persons living in Canada. By letting us know where you're joining us from today, we can see a little bit more of the areas that might need additional outreach and engagement. I'm noticing already there's a ton of, Ontario-based individuals, and I'm not seeing too many in the territory, so that's definitely something we can flag for future reference. Moving on to our second icebreaker question. We're really curious to know what health condition or disease area that's relevant to you or the patient group that you represent. Only if you feel comfortable in sharing. But by letting us know who you represent, we can get a better understanding of the range and unique needs across groups and get a better understanding of who we're engaging with today. So feel free to enter that in the chat. I could barely keep up with the chat already with just the speed of the comments. So that's wonderful. Thank you all so much. We will be reviewing every single comment that's submitted in the chat, and so thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Michelle Gibbens, our Director of Engagement. And so I'm going to pass it over to her, and she's going to speak a little bit more about this project. Michelle?
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. As Heather has already shared, we are committed to involving patients in the work of our organization, and today's webinar focused on patient input and reimbursement reviews is an important area and very connected to that commitment. As you may be aware, Canada's Drug Agency has recently released our strategic plan for 2025 to 2030, which includes the guiding principles that underpin and guide everything that we do. These core principles, and particularly the principles of partnership, integrity, and inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, are integral to and important considerations for the work that we are undertaking to involve the patient input process for reimbursement reviews. As you are likely already aware, the assessments and recommendations provided through Canada's Drug Agency's reimbursement review process provide non-binding recommendations that help guide the reimbursement decisions of Canada's federal, provincial, and territorial governments, with the exception of Quebec, where that work is done by NS. We have a long-standing commitment to ensuring that patient perspectives are included with the reimbursement review process. For each drug, plasma product, or cell and gene therapy reviewed in our drug reimbursement review process, there is an opportunity for patient and clinician groups to provide input. Currently, patient perspectives are incorporated into reimbursement reviews through written patient group input, presentations from individuals for certain situations, and through patient members sitting on the expert committees bringing forward the input received into the deliberative discussion. We'll explain more about how this all fits together in the context of the reimbursement review process just a bit later, but just wanting to emphasize that it is this patient group input process that is the focus of today's webinar and our conversation today, and that we hope to continue beyond today. We are committed to considering how we can evolve this aspect of the drug reimbursement review process. And our commitment to having patient input in reimbursement review process is not new, but we thought it would be helpful to start today by sharing explicitly our goals for having patient input in reimbursement reviews as important context for what will follow in this webinar. For drug reimbursement reviews, our goals for patient input include ensuring that there is meaningful involvement from patients so patient perspectives can be included in the deliberation and reflected in the resulting reports. Patient perspectives are also key to contextualize the available evidence, whether it be from Canada's Drug Agency evidence review for non-sponsored reviews that are being deliberated on at the Formulary Management Expert Committee, or industry-sponsored submitted evidence for sponsored reviews being deliberated on by the Canadian Drug Expert Committee or Pan-Canadian Oncology Expert Review Committee. As will be highlighted when we share more information about the deliberative framework shortly, we recognize that there are areas in the framework where the information needed is best provided by you from the perspective of the lived and living experience of patients and those who support and care for and about you, as well as the patient groups with whom you are connected. We recognize that there are others who are interested in the conversation today and in the drug reimbursement input processes. However, as we work towards evolving patient input, we felt that it was essential that we start by engaging with patient groups and patients, since it is your perspectives and your contributions of patient group input that are key to this process. There will be opportunities for us to consult and seek feedback from others as this work progresses. But we are starting here with you, the patient community who are interested in and affected by the drug reimbursement review process and have made so many important contributions to this process up to this point. As Sam mentioned, we want to interact with you through the course of this webinar, and are pleased so many of you are joining us. So looking for some ways to do that through polls and other means. And so invite you to respond to this first poll. We're very interested in understanding whether the way I've just described the goals for our patient input in reimbursement reviews align with your understanding of the goals for patient input. Please indicate yes or no. And if you have some different ideas to share about what the goals are from your perspective, we would welcome you to add your comments in the chat so that we can look at that and understand that. Thank you for so actively participating. We really appreciate your participation. So moving on to focus on the purpose of today's webinar, what we're hoping to do today is to begin the conversation by informing and sharing some information with you, validating some of the goals and objectives that we're setting for moving forward, and beginning to explore your ideas about how we best do that. We'll begin by introducing and informing you about why we are working towards evolving the patient input process. We'll talk about the current input process as a basis for understanding how we might move forward, and briefly go over the deliberative framework, as well as highlight where patient group input currently fits into the reimbursement review process, and so that we all have that shared understanding to move forward. We'll use polls again later to have an opportunity to hear from you about whether what we're summarizing in terms of what we've heard aligns from patient groups already about their experience with the current process aligns with your experience, or if there's other things that you would want to share with us, and whether our proposed objectives for improving or evolving patient group input align with your perceptions as well. So towards the end of the webinar, we'll close by beginning to explore the what and how of patient perspectives provided through the input submission to support the committee's consideration of patient perspectives and deliberation. But we are intending today's webinar to be the start of a conversation. We are providing patient groups with two ways to engage in our efforts to evolve the patient input process as we move forward. As Sam mentioned, a written feedback process, also opportunities to join some small group discussions. And what we're hoping is that you can choose to join any one approach based on your preference and what works best for you. And we'll be circling back to this, and information on how to participate and register for these activities will be shared at the end of the webinar. So starting with what we have heard and some of the common themes and what we have heard over time. We very much recognize that today's webinar is a continuation of conversations that we've been having with individuals and groups over an extended period of time. Through various mechanisms and discussions in recent years, we've heard signals from various groups who have contributed to the sponsored reimbursement reviews or non-sponsored reimbursement reviews about their experiences with and perspectives on the patient group input process. And there's some common themes of what we've heard, and that's what we're reflecting here on the slide. We have heard consistently that groups often expend considerable time, effort, and resources to prepare written input submissions. We've also heard that patient groups who submit input are sometimes unclear about how their input is used and considered in deliberation. Some patient groups have also flagged that they feel uncertain about what is needed or useful when submitting input for a reimbursement review. In addition to having greater clarity on what is needed, we have also heard from some that they would appreciate feedback on what was more or less useful after the review has been completed and their input has been used in that process. We've also received questions and feedback with some groups looking for more information or guidance to provide them with clarity on the process and any requirements for the patient group input submission process. And so, you know, that's what we are summarizing here in terms of the themes that we have heard from patients to this point, and has informed our thinking about what some of our objectives need to be moving forward. And I'll shift to that in a moment. But before doing so, I also want to acknowledge that we've heard similar signals from groups about the process for patient group feedback on draft recommendations. We are starting our work you know, today and leading up to today, look at how we can evolve the patient group input rather than feedback process, because the input process has a very important role in informing the reimbursement reviews and deliberations, which ultimately lead to the recommendations. However, we do anticipate considering later how and if the process for feedback on draft recommendations may need to evolve as we consider continuous improvement opportunities for our drug reimbursement review programs and processes. We've also heard from both patient and clinician groups about questions and experiences related to the clinician group input process that isn't, you know, a similar process for clinician perspectives to be contributed to the reimbursement reviews. So we are committed to a separate engagement process around the potential to evolve that as well. So just wanting to acknowledge that we have a focus today, but we have heard other areas for improvement, and we will consider those as we move forward. Now shifting to, based on what the themes that in what we have heard, the improvement objectives that we are proposing for involving the input process. The first is that we think there's a need to improve the ease of patient input submission for patient groups, including clarifying processes and requirements and reducing the effort and resources required by patient groups to prepare input submissions. We would also have identified an objective of increasing transparency of how patient group input is used during expert committee deliberations by clarifying what is most needed from patient perspectives to support deliberation. And we'll, you know, definitely be highlighting more about that just a little later. But I would be remiss to say that the patient group input, evolving the patient group input process is not the only way that we are trying to increase and improve transparency. There are other improvements that you would have, you know, you may have already heard of that are in progress that we are also hoping will help with that clarity on how patient group input is used, such as improvements to reporting, because that are also aimed at addressing this objective of increasing transparency. And the final objective that we have is that we do believe that there is an opportunity to align and focus input on what is needed to support deliberations. And the recent publishing of the deliberative framework that Deirdre will speak to just very shortly, it provides us with an opportunity to have the conversation with that framework in mind and in focus, and have that discussion, a collaborative discussion about how things could evolve to align and focus on what is needed to support deliberation in alignment with that framework. So I'd like to pause here just to get a sense from you about whether these objectives that we've identified for evolving patient group input resonate with your experience and perspective on what we should be addressing as we evolve. So our poll question for you is, do you agree with the improvement objectives we've outlined for evolving the patient input process? And agree, disagree, or indicate that you have some other suggestions. And if you do have some other suggestions, you know, please do use the chat. We'd be interested in hearing your preliminary thoughts on those. And we'll, as Sam said, you know, definitely be looking at all of the suggestions provided in the chat. Okay, so thank you. Thank you again for the very active participation in that, and pleased to see that there's this, appears to be quite a bit of agreement that we're heading in the right directions with those as objectives for improvement. But also very glad to see that some are offering that there might be some other things to think about, and we'll definitely consider that as we move forward. And look forward to the opportunity to consider what you provide in the chat as well. Thank you. All right. So where we are today, we have been working for some time now to continue to prepare to initiate this work and this conversation with you. As I've highlighted already, with sharing what we've heard from patient groups already, that we did go back to the feedback that we've received from various avenues, and consolidate that feedback, and consider it in those themes that we presented. We've also had, discussed addressing the themes with staff and management, and also with our expert committee. And you'll hear more about what we've, heard from our expert committee members about what they need a little bit later. We've reviewed the best practice and consulted with other health technology assessment agencies as well, so that we will have that to consider as we, alongside what we hear from you, to propose how we might evolve. And I want to acknowledge that I anticipate that many of you on this call probably participated in the recent consultation process for other improvements on drug reimbursement reviews, and took the opportunity to share a number of ideas and comments and suggestions and needs related to how to the patient group input process as part of that, and that we did take that into account. And are considering that as we move forward. So, and as I noted just a few minutes ago, the publishing of the deliberative framework really offers us this ideal time to focus on how we can evolve patient input. And so we're looking forward to moving with that. Before we proceed for other aspects of our conversation, I do just want to take a moment to put today's conversation into context with a brief overview of how reimbursement decisions are made. Drug reimbursement decisions are made in Canada, with an emphasis on the role of Canada's drug agency, and where our drug reimbursement review process recommendations fit into this bigger picture, which involves many others. As you know, Health Canada has a role as a regulator to provide regulatory approval to evaluate whether a drug works and is safe, and provide that regulatory approval for a drug to be marketed and sold in Canada. Our role in this process, overall process by which drug reimbursement decisions are made, is this drug reimbursement review process. That's the focus of our conversation today, where we provide the comprehensive assessments of clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness, as well as the inclusion of patient and clinician perspectives of a drug or a drug class. The assessments inform non-binding recommendations that help guide the reimbursement decisions of Canada's federal, provincial, and territorial governments, with the exception of Quebec. And that patient group input and clinician group input processes are a component of that review and considered through that process. Canada's Drug Agency provides reimbursement recommendations and advice to these publicly funded drug programs and provincial cancer agencies, and reimbursement recommendations are made through one of three expert committees: the Canadian Drug Expert Committee for non-oncology drugs, Pan-Canadian Oncology Expert Review Committee for oncology drugs, and the Formulary Management Expert Review Committee for non-sponsored reviews. The Patent and Medicine Prices Review Board and Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance are another key aspects of this overall drug system process for the formation of decisions about funding and reimbursing drugs in Canada. the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance may conduct price negotiations using the recommendations from Canada's Drug Agency and NS in Quebec and other factors to determine whether or not it will enter into a price negotiation for a drug. And then following that, public drug plans use our reimbursement review recommendations to make decisions about whether to list the drug on their formularies, or in other words, provide public funding coverage for the drug. So we're not focusing on all aspects of this system and this process today, but rather, very focused in on our role in the reimbursement review process, and specifically the patient group input process for that. But just do want to acknowledge and situate that all of this occurs in a bigger picture context. Now, just to give a little bit of an overview of the reimbursement review process and look at it from a three-stage perspective. And again, those of you who may have joined or viewed webinars related to the other drug reimbursement review improvements just a couple of months ago, we'll have seen something similar, a very similar diagram, or essentially exactly the same type of diagram as this, identifying the three stages of input, throughput, and output. A reimbursement review can be initiated at the request of the manufacturer of a drug for new drugs in Canada, or at the request of public drug plans for drugs that are later on in their life cycles. And as I noted earlier, all the reimbursement review recommendations are made by the expert committees that I noted, with formulary management expert committee being the committee that is focused on recommendations for drugs that are later in their life cycle. During the input stage, Canada's Drug Agency review team assesses the evidence and creates clinical and economic reports that will be shared with the committee members as part of their deliberation. That's also the point that we ask for written input from patient groups, clinician groups, and public drug programs at the start of the review. That input is the input that is received is posted on our website for all interested parties to be aware of what we have received. In the throughput stage, this is where the expert committees use the review reports and input to deliberate and make recommendations. These committees are composed of experts from various fields, including healthcare professionals, clinical specialists, and patient members. Their role is to carefully evaluate the evidence and input provided, ensuring that the recommendations are well-informed and balanced. Their discussions follow a specific framework called a deliberative framework, and you're going to hear more about that in a moment. Finally, in the output stage, the final recommendation is shared through a report that outlines how the expert committee came to the recommendation. And recommendations can be reimbursed with conditions, or not reimbursed. This process is intended to provide reimbursement recommendations with input from and consideration of this perspective of various interested parties, including, very importantly, the patient perspective. And with that, I want to pass over to my colleague Deirdre, who Sam introduced earlier, who will focus on sharing more information about the deliberative framework with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michelle. As part of our updates to our pharmaceutical reviews process, in February, we published a document describing the deliberative process at Canada's Drug Agency, and that includes the deliberative framework that is used to guide the deliberation in our committee meetings. So the domains of the deliberative framework describe the scope of relevant considerations for the expert committees. First, clinical value is the value that patients derive from a health technology in terms of its effect on their health and health-related quality of life. It involves measuring the clinical benefits and harms of a drug compared to its existing options. With unmet clinical need, we're focused on conditions where the current treatments fall short due to clinical gaps. It's based on the morbidity or mortality, which is how likely the condition is to make someone seriously ill or lead to death. It also assesses whether there are few or even no effective treatments available, and if there are challenges with evidence generation due to the rarity of the condition or other ethical issues. For example, if the patient population includes a vulnerable population, such as children or those experiencing mental illness. The distinct social and ethical considerations domain acknowledges that there are ethical considerations throughout the deliberative process, and it focuses on the ones that are not already addressed in our other domains. This includes non-clinical needs, and these are the social, psychological, and logistical factors beyond the direct clinical outcomes. It also assesses the social and ethical implications of the drug. The economic considerations domain considers economic evidence to inform the financial, human, and other resource implications associated with the drug under review, given its clinical benefits. And finally, the impacts on health systems domain assesses the feasibility of bringing the drug into the health system, whether it's organizationally or economically. A key goal of our deliberative framework is to make sure that patient perspectives are integrated across assessment domains. So let's talk about how that works in a deliberation. Within each domain of value, the committee is given a set of considerations that are focused on patient perspectives to guide their assessment. Starting with clinical value, as I said, one of the main considerations is how the technology impacts patients' health and health-related quality of life. So here the committees review clinical evidence, but they also consider which of these outcomes are important to patients and whether the drug meets the clinical needs that have been identified by patients. For that unmet clinical need, the focus is on the severity of the condition and the availability, effectiveness, or potential harms of alternative treatments. The committees consider whether existing treatments are adequately meeting patients' needs or if there are gaps that the drug under review might fill. When it comes to social and ethical considerations, we consider aspects that go beyond the clinical outcomes. So those, again, are the unmet clinical needs of patients and caregivers, the accessibility or the acceptability of the drug under review, and important treatment burdens. In this domain, the committees are asked to consider whether the drug aligns with patients' values, whether it meets their non-clinical needs, and whether it requires measures to address social and ethical implications, such as privacy or informed consent. Economic considerations also touch on patient perspectives indirectly, as it's evaluated through clinical effectiveness and harms in our reports. And finally, there's the impacts on health systems domain, which is a bit different because it doesn't focus directly on patient perspectives. Instead, it's about the health system's capacity to implement the drug. Committees consider whether the system has the resources, staff, training, and infrastructure needed for implementation. And while we recognize that those factors do ultimately affect patients, this domain is centered on the system's operational readiness. This structure ensures that the patient perspectives remain central to our deliberation, with committees considering patient perspectives across each relevant domain. And I will now pass it back over to Sam, who will speak to how patient perspectives are included in our reimbursement reviews.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. So I'd like to just start with the term patient perspective. You probably heard it quite a few times already this afternoon. So patient perspectives refers to patient values as it relates to their health conditions and treatment. It also refers to patients' health experiences and patients' preferences or goals related to their care or treatment. And so how do we define what a patient group is whenever we're thinking about reimbursement reviews? So for the purposes of our reimbursement reviews, a patient group is defined as an organization or an organized group that represents patients with a specific disease or condition or a collection of diseases or conditions. So any interested patient group can provide input. We often hear from small Facebook support groups all the way up to large national charities. So I'll spend some time speaking a little bit more about how patient perspectives are incorporated into reimbursement reviews. And so it's really one of three main ways. So one is through the written group input, which you're likely familiar with already. The second would be through presentations from individuals. And the third would be through the patient member sitting on the committee who brings forward the input received into the deliberative discussion. So patient group input compiles multiple patient perspectives to provide a broad overview of experiences, values, and treatment goals. The patient member on the committee is actually a sitting committee member, and so they represent disease-agnostic lived experience interests and ensures that patient perspectives are considered during deliberations. A person with lived experience presentation is selectively used in scenarios where additional insights are particularly beneficial to support deliberation. So it offers more personal insights from patients, caregivers, or family members by having a presentation and dialogue with committee members going into their deliberations. So just to dive a little bit deeper into each concept, patient group input helps reviewers and expert committee members understand the impact that the condition and treatment has on patients, caregivers, and family members. It really offers a representative understanding of patient perspectives. So it really helps the committee review health considerations, disease experiences, treatment outcomes, and impacts. It also helps understand the diversity of needs among patients and healthcare settings across Canada, and could highlight needs that are specific to certain communities or certain subpopulations. Lastly, it helps committee members understand the potential issues around patients' ability to use their preference on and access to the drug under review. And so this occurs at the onset of a reimbursement review via the 35-day written input period. Moving on to the patient member on an expert committee meeting, really they represent the patient interest and have experience as a person with lived experience, either as a patient, caregiver, or family member. They also have interest in issues related to healthcare and ideally have some experience working with committees. And so these patient members serve a term on the committee, just like any other committee member. The patient member does not represent the patient population for a specific indication of a review. Instead, they really ensure that patient perspectives are considered throughout deliberations. They do this by reviewing input received prior to the deliberation meeting, as well as presenting the collective input received to committee members to highlight key considerations, themes, and observations, and they ensure that the patient perspectives are discussed during deliberations. So some reviews with complex considerations related to the therapies or the health conditions involved might warrant an opportunity for more interactive engagement, and really it's meant to enhance the expert committee's understanding of patients' perspectives. So in certain scenarios, presentations from people with lived experience are included to provide a personal perspective from a patient, caregiver, support person, or a family member. These presentations offer a personal and nuanced insight into the impact of that disease and its treatment on an individual's daily life and their families. It's done through a narrative approach and a dialogue with committee members. So these presentations occur during committee meetings and involve a question and answer period, allowing members to gain a deeper understanding directly from individuals impacted by the condition under review. At this moment, persons with lived experience presentations are used in all FMEC reviews, as well as in certain scenarios of complex reviews, which include situations where it is the first drug approved in the therapeutic area. So for example, it could be a new drug for a rare type of cancer, being the first approved treatment specifically for that type of cancer. The second scenario is when the drug has the potential to alter existing treatment paradigms. So for example, it could be a new drug for diabetes that significantly improves blood sugar control and reduces complication compared to existing treatments. I hope this provides some clarity on how the patient perspectives are included. I'd also like to highlight when these perspectives are included into reimbursement reviews. So Michelle did a wonderful job explaining kind of an overview of a reimbursement review, but really this is now specific to when patient perspectives get incorporated. So this timeline shows the phases of a reimbursement review overlaid with the key milestones in which patient perspectives are included. So starting with the initiation of a reimbursement review, the input period is open for 35 days for interested parties in which patient groups and clinician groups have the opportunity to submit input into the review, just like you might be familiar with doing now. Following the close of that input period, the CDA AMC review team reviews all the input received for consideration into the reports, and they share the input received with the committee members ahead of the committee meeting's deliberation date. The patient member sitting on the committee is tasked with reviewing input received and presenting some key themes or elements to the committee during the committee meeting to discuss. As mentioned, in some scenarios, a person with lived experience would also be engaged to present and have a dialogue with the committee members just prior to going into their closed-door deliberations during that committee meeting. Finally, following the committee meeting, when the draft recommendation is posted, there is a 10-day feedback period open for patient groups to comment on the outcome of the review prior to it being finalized and posted as a final recommendation. At that stage, that would end our review. So I'm going to stop here and I'm actually going to pass it back over to Michelle to continue on the conversation about expert committees.
Thank you very much, Sam. So as I mentioned earlier, part of our preparation for engaging further with you around this work has been to just connect with our expert committees and understand what they want and need to know from the patient perspectives. And so now that we'll shift to that, now that Sam has so helpfully highlighted the different sources of patient perspectives in the review process. So the patient perspectives are an important aspect of information that supports deliberations. Following on from publishing the deliberative framework that Deirdre explained, we have initiated connections with the expert committee members to hear more about what they are looking for and need from that perspective. And we'll continue to stay connected with them as this work progresses to ensure that any changes in input being considered will support their work and deliberation. What I want to share now is a summary of some key points of what has been emphasized for us in terms of what expert committee members need to support their deliberation. The patient input focused on providing information and patient perspectives that are based on that focus on addressing gaps in the evidence. Information that is not available from what is currently available in the evidence being considered for the review. Also, perspectives and experiences that go beyond the drug under review, that support an understanding of what it is like to manage and live with and seek treatment for the condition, and information that represents multiple perspectives from across Canada. And so just to give you, flesh this out a little bit in terms of what this might mean. For example, these may include, but not limited to, certainly these are just some examples to share, what unmet needs, including non-clinical needs, are important to you, and what are those? Of the treatment side effects or adverse events you might experience or have experienced, which ones are the most difficult to manage and which ones, from your perspective, might be tolerable? What disease symptoms and outcomes are most relevant to you, most important to you? Any insights on preferences related to treatments? What's important? What informs considerations of treatment for you? And other types of information not captured by the clinical evidence, such as, that Deirdre highlighted earlier in terms of ethical considerations, environmental considerations, non-clinical outcomes that affect your lives are important to you. So just to clarify, the expert committees are not looking for a literature review, nor do they require results from multiple or large surveys with a large sample, large representative sample. It's important to understand that patient input is not critically appraised in the reimbursement review process. And I mentioned this because this is, a not infrequent question that we get asked. It is not treated as real world or any other type of evidence. It's an important input that provides these really important patient perspectives to contextualize the evidence that is available for review. From patient perspectives provided through patient input, the expert committees want to gain an understanding of the patient perspective beyond the evidence submitted by industry sponsors or provided through a Canada's Drug Agency review in the case of the non-sponsor reviews for drug products later in their life cycle. They're interested in a range of perspectives that will provoke questions or challenge assumptions about the evidence that they are looking at. The range of perspectives important to consider could vary and could be from different geographic locations. Perhaps that's an important consideration or it could be experiences of individuals who are more newly diagnosed versus those people living with the disease for a longer period of time, or it could include, importantly, highlighting experiences of people with fewer social or financial resources who are less likely to be included in the clinical trials, but may have important considerations when thinking about treatments and access to treatments. So we've shared quite a bit of information, and I hope that's been helpful to you. And we want to hear more from you. And we're going to shift to that now. Based on what you've heard today, we were very interested to understand, do you feel you have a better understanding of what information from a patient perspective is important to inform reimbursement reviews? We're offering the response options of yes, it's clear, or no, it's unclear, or at least aspects remain unclear. And we would really be interested to hear from you if you're answering no, if there's some areas that we could provide greater clarity on. And that would be really helpful to inform as we move forward. So give you a moment to respond to that. Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful to see, and I look forward to seeing the comments in the chat. We're very pleased. We certainly tried to respond to questions that we've heard over time. So hope that pleased to see that for many of you that we have added some greater increase, that it is clear what is needed from the patient perspective in reimbursement reviews. So I appreciate the feedback and look forward to the comments for those of you who indicated that some greater clarity could still be used. So thank you very much for that. So we've shared, as I said, quite a bit of information for you. Now we want to hear more from you, and just to shape a bit what we're interested in hearing from you. We want to hear your ideas about new ways for submitting patient input, ideas for how to focus the input on what is needed to support deliberation and important to understand from a patient perspective. So some of the information that we just shared about that, how could we, obtain input in a way that helps to focus on those key areas. What guidance are you interested in having to help you with your input submission? What type of communication would you like from us about input submissions? And so we're going to have some interaction with you through polls to start to hear some of your preliminary thoughts and ideas. And then that will be followed by some time for question and answer. But I'm going to pass it over to Sam, who is going to facilitate this next component of getting some input from you and facilitating, moderating the question and answer period. So thank you very much. Sam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's great to see so much discourse in the chat. It's hard to keep up with how many comments are coming through, so thank you so much. Maybe we can launch our fourth poll here, and we were wondering, based off what you heard today and your own experiences with the patient group input process in drug reimbursement reviews, which areas of the input submission process are you most excited to see evolve? And so really, if there's something that's not listed here, we'd really invite you to flag it in the chat. This is not meant to be prescriptive, but really to just get a bit of a sense to initiate that initial dialogue. So is it really about what input you submit, or perhaps it's more about how you submit the input, or how to capture and collate multiple perspectives in your submissions, or really perhaps it's the guidance for your input submission, or something completely different. And again, please feel free to add that to the chat. We'll give it a few moments for participants to answer. But if you have any questions for the Q&A as well, we will be beginning that shortly. So feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A. We won't be able to see them in the chat if it's a question for the Q&A. So I just want to mention that. So maybe we can wrap up this poll. So it looks like there's quite a variety of perspectives on this, and that's really why we want to engage with so many various patient groups. There's a lot of different ways that we can go about it, but we really want to make sure that we're considering, different sizes of patient groups and different mandates as well. So thank you for that. So moving on to our next poll. So what changes to the input process submission format would make providing input easier for you? So we're curious, do you enjoy having the written input, just having an input template that you've used similar to the past? Or perhaps a verbal input would be important to you to be able to utilize, whether that be through interviews or focus groups or video submissions. potentially a combination of written and verbal input formats or more variety. Or perhaps you'd like to have just more unstructured input where you have more open-ended and broad input questions. Perhaps it's more targeted and it's really aligned with the deliberative framework and very structured, or maybe a combination of structured and unstructured questions, or something completely different. Again, we really are open to all kinds of new ideas. And so if none of these really resonate with you, feel free to add them into the chat as well. We'll give it a few moments on this one because I know there's quite a few multiple choice to go through. Um, but we really appreciate the responses. And again, this is just the start of the conversation and will help us plan for our small group consultations that are coming up. So I think we're probably okay to end the poll. So it sounds like there's a bit of a theme here on the two answers with a combination. So flexibility seems to be appreciated. So thank you all so much for contributing to this. So for our last question for the audience of the day, and again, thank you so much for engaging with us. Are you aware of any guidance or tools used elsewhere that would make the input process easier for you? So we'd welcome you to share that in the chat. Maybe you've seen some best practices out there, potentially internationally or within Canada. But it could be things like maybe online video guides or learning sessions, guidance documents, or potentially self-directed learning modules or other methods. We're really curious to hear if there's anything out there that you've particularly found helpful or that you would be interested in us incorporating. So we'll just give it a moment, but I'd also like to encourage you to think about this as well and bring this forward into your feedback submissions or in the small group consultations. If you're only able to get out a few comments in the chat today, write them down and bring them back to our discussions in the future as well. We want to hear more from you. So perhaps we can move on to the next slide. I want to really outline some of the ways that you can get involved. So this really marks the beginning of a comprehensive consultation process. So if you're interested in contributing your thoughts towards this project, we would welcome you to participate by either submitting written feedback during the feedback period of May 12th to June 5th, so May 12th being on Monday, or you can also join us during a small group consultation where you can meet with us and have a discussion and share your feedback and ideas. We wanted to give some flexibility to join us. And these sessions are planned for patient organization representatives and individual patients or caregivers. So some additional details are going to be coming on future engagement efforts for the clinician input process. And so keep an eye out if you're not registered for our notifications, please consider it. A follow-up email will be sent to those registered for this webinar with details about how you can contribute to this important work. Alternatively, you can subscribe to our news and updates notification or visit our events page and you can learn how to register for upcoming engagement activities. I believe Sona just put the links to subscribe in the chat for you, so please feel free to do so. So thank you so much, Michelle and Deirdre, for speaking today. We do have some time for Q&A available now for our participants. So I do see some questions popping up in our Q&A, but feel free to continue to add some, and I'll be moderating the question period. So Michelle, my first question for you, you spoke about reducing barriers and focusing input. Are you looking at standardized submissions like checklists or surveys, or the comment said that, it would be a shame to lose the qualitative inputs from patients and patient groups?
Thanks very much, Sam. And yeah, great question. And I guess a couple of observations I would share. First of all, we're not presupposing, this engagement with you and hearing from you about your ideas about how we evolve is very important. So we haven't predetermined exactly what things will look like in the future. But I did note, as Sam pointed out in the poll, the feedback, that combination of structured and unstructured, and it seemed to be something that folks were noting, and combination of approaches. So I think that's definitely something we'll be considering going forward, and absolutely hear the point about the qualitative information is important, and having that qualitative information that really reflects the experience rather than trying to standardize or limit things to checklists. So absolutely hear the point on that, and look forward to evolving. Considering all of the input that we'll receive, hopefully over the next several weeks, and then circling back to propose some options that we are considering, and seeking some feedback on them is part of our longer term process around this. So hoping but really appreciate the feedback about the importance of the qualitative information, and we agree. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Our next question asked if we can provide a little bit of clarity on how patient perspective is taken into account in each of the 5 criteria in the new deliberative framework. So what weight is given, and how, for example, is it taken into account in a socioeconomic or an economic analysis? I'm not sure if Michelle, did you want to start? Maybe Deirdre can jump in.
I think that's actually probably a great question for Deirdre, because it's about the deliberative process. And I think it highlights potentially an opportunity to clarify how those frameworks that framework and the different domains are considered in the process. So.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I really appreciate this question, because I think it's quite critical to understanding what we mean when we say that we want to consider patient perspectives throughout all of the domains. If you look at the expert committee deliberation document that was shared in the chat and was published in February, you'll see that the deliberative framework applies to all of the expert committees at CDA-AMC, including the devices and the drug reviews. But for the drug reviews, there is a fairly structured path in which they work through the 5 domains. So the committees start by asking about clinical value. And if the answer is that there is no comparative clinical value, they move to a negative recommendation. But if it's clear that there is comparative clinical value, they move to a positive recommendation. More often, the clinical benefits and harms are uncertain. And so at that point, the committee moves through the discussion of unmet clinical need to determine whether it's in favor of a positive recommendation, and then unmet non-clinical need and health inequities to determine that. But what I want to make clear is that we're often asked the question about weighing patient input against clinical evidence, for example. And really, when the committee is looking at it, they aren't weighed against each other. So as I explained, clinical value is made up of the evidence around benefits and harms. But the really important addition is that patient group input that highlights whether, for example, even if the drug has benefit, it's actually addressing the needs that patients have identified. So it's not really weighing patient group versus our evidence. It's considering them together and holistically to understand all of the domains.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. That was very helpful. I think this next question might be a little applicable to both of you, but maybe I can start with Michelle. So how do I know if my input made a difference in the final decision of a reimbursement review?
So thank you for the question. I think that's an example of one that that objective that we identified of increasing transparency being one of our objectives for evolving patient group input, but also of a number of other improvement, steps and initiatives that we have in progress around reimbursement reviews, and that we're really hoping that things will be clearer through adjustments to reports and things about how patient input was used and considered in the process, and how the recommendation process. The other aspect that I would maybe touch on is that one of the areas that we're interested in understanding more, and again, one of the themes that we have heard leading up to this point, but want to understand more and consider what would be helpful and useful as we move forward, is the idea of groups, looking for feedback on what they've submitted, understanding what was most useful, if they were to, the next time that if there's an opportunity to do a submission, what type of information, would be most useful, what was useful in the context of the review. So we're also like considering what we do with that in that regard. So welcome any thoughts or comments starting in the chat, and looking forward to some small group discussion and ideas being shared in writing in the coming weeks as well. So Deirdre, feel free to add anything you might want to that as well. So.
Thanks. I think I just reiterate that one of the changes that came with the deliberative framework was also the opportunity to be clear throughout the 5 domains about where patient group input or the personal lived experience contributed. So you will see, as these changes evolve, changes to our recommendation reports that make that more explicit, that we have been piloting with our formulary management expert committee, to specifically highlight the patient group input and the personal lived experience in each of the domains, irrespective of the reimbursement decision. This will be included in all of our reviews and recommendation reports.
Thank you both so much. One of our questions that we got through the Q&A is just about when to register, and so maybe I can answer that myself. The email will be going out on Monday, May 12th, so this coming Monday, to all those that registered. So if you were registered today for the webinar, you will receive the link to register for any group, small group consultations. My next question for you, Michelle, is just about persons with lived experience, patient members, and I guess it's just some questions more about the clarity of the role. And so I wonder if you maybe can comment on those aspects and potentially, how we can clarify better for the future.
Sorry, Sam, just to clarify the clarity of the role of
a person with lived experience, as well as the patient member on the committee.
Okay.
So it's just some questions about clarifying what their roles are within reimbursement reviews and how we communicate that.
Okay, yeah. So thank you for that, and I appreciate the question highlighting the need for further information and clarity on that. The information that Sam shared was a starting point to try to address that, because we recognize, wanted to be clear that there are there's not just one source of or one way that patient perspectives are being considered in the reimbursement review process, but there's multiple. And so again, the patient group input is the one that is consistent, as well as the patient member, having a patient member on members on all of the expert committees are consistent across all reviews. The persons with lived experience, as Sam explained, those presentations are limited to happen in certain scenarios where the added benefit and value of the opportunity for the patient to have someone available to speak directly to the committee and to interact with the committee, because of the complexity of the condition and the treatment under review, and the considerations that may require more in-depth understanding. So that's where that is focused at this point. And the role of the person presenting is to present and answer questions with the committee there prior to the deliberation happening. The role of the patient member is to consider all of the patient group input, as do all committee members. But the role of the patient member really being, having someone assign that responsibility to make sure that patient input is being brought forward into the deliberation, and speaking to that throughout the deliberative process. They're an ongoing core member of the committee. And so, doing that for all reviews under consideration as a, so those are some of the distinctions: the long-term committee role versus, sharing perspective on an experience for one review. at a point in time with interaction with the committee. So I hope that's helpful and helpful for us to know that we maybe need to continue to provide more information and clarity on those various roles and ways that the patient perspectives are coming into reimbursement review. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Michelle. So we do have a time for a few more questions. One of which is, will the feedback that we receive on this process from May 12th to the 5th of June, will this be posted publicly afterwards?
Okay, thank you for that. So similar to what was done recently with other improvements to the drug reimbursement review process, what we are committed to doing is circling back with a summary, to highlight what we heard and how that's been considered and what we are proposing for options or consider, potential options for moving forward, and having, that another opportunity for perhaps, very direct feedback on some of the options being considered is what we're anticipating as part of the process. So not, sharing exact, everyone's detailed feedback from small group discussions or written feedback, but definitely, providing some insight into what we heard and how we're considering that, and how that's being considered and addressed in the options that we're proposing for how we evolve and change things moving forward.
Great, thank you, Michelle. My next question for you would be, how are you making sure that voices from smaller or underrepresented communities are being heard?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sam. So that is very important to us, and we recognize, that can be a challenge. Part of our intention of offering multiple ways of engaging and starting by sharing, quite a bit of detailed information in this webinar about the process was, to not assume that everyone who might want to contribute has a high level of understanding of the process as it stands right now. So, we encourage anyone who's interested, and if the methods that we've proposed by which to engage moving forward don't fit or work, we're very interested in hearing from you still, and considering how we can have those perspectives considered. And as we move forward, we'll look to see again if there's maybe some, as Sam explained when introducing the poll about why we were interested to know where folks were from and the conditions, et cetera, that they're representing. If there's a need for us to look at doing some further outreach to obtain perspectives that we may not be hearing from, we'll consider that along as part of our process as well. So I hope that's helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. So I think we have time for one final question. It seems like the Q&A is starting to slow down a little bit. So my last question for you, Michelle, would be, do I need to be part of a formal organization to share my feedback on this?
So I'm assuming by the question that it's feedback on how we evolve patient input for reimbursement reviews moving forward, and absolutely not. We do welcome hearing, from groups, but we are also very interested in hearing from individuals as well who, are interested in participating and have perspectives to share. So open to both individuals and groups. So.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you, Deirdre, as well for your responses. I think we can move on to the next slide now. So that brings us to the end of the session today. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us to learn more about patient group input and drug reimbursement reviews, and specifically what the future should look like. We really appreciate your time. We have so much interest in this work, and it's really wonderful. We've had close to 300 people registered, and I believe close to 160 people in attendance. So it's just wonderful to see that interest. Merci à tous pour votre participation aujourd'hui. Nous apprécions le temps que vous avez pris pour nous joindre, et nous sommes tellement heureux de voir cet intérêt dans ce travail. So I want to give a big thanks to Michelle, Deirdre, and Heather for joining us today. Please visit the website to sign up for the weekly updates and be advised of the posting of the feedback document. Again, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel as of Monday. We will be emailing all those registered with a link to the webinar as well on the 12th, and that will include how to register for these small group sessions if you're interested. There will be a post-event survey that you can complete by clicking the small checkmark icon at the top of your screen. But lastly, thank you all again so much for attending, engaging with us. We hope that we can continue this engagement with you as well throughout the course of this. Feel free to contact us or connect with us on social media, or if you have any questions specific for us, you can reach out to our requests email on the screen. So with that, we can close the session, but I'm wishing you all a wonderful rest of the week. So thank you so much.
Merci tout le monde.